This is Dick Clark with our special artist profile of a group that brought romance back to the charts at a time when hard rock dominated the music scene. They brought a fresh new sound to rock, and audiences liked their records enough to consistently push them up on the surveys, and I'm talking about the group headed by David Gates, Bread.
It don't matter to me if you really feel that you need some time to be free. Time to go out searching for yourself. Hope you to find time to go to find. 'Cause it don't matter to me.
That's a pretty thing, isn't it? Bread with a song that hit number 10 in 1970, It Don't Matter to Me. Now, that song, like almost all of Bread's records, was written by a man named David Gates. Now, he's a man who brought a diverse musical background to the band when he helped put it together in the mid-'60s. David's parents, who were both heavily into music, made sure he got exposed to all kinds of sounds when he was younger. Now, you might not think of Tulsa, Oklahoma as a place where you'd be surrounded by a wide variety of music, but from what David told me, it's just the opposite.
You got classical music, you got symphonies there, and then you've got rock and roll. And you put it all together, and I think it's an advantage, at least when I was there, to have been exposed to all that kind of music in that part of the country. It's different from the coasts. The coasts are a little bit more limited. You really don't have a true country music cult in New York City. I mean, there may be now, but there sure wasn't then. And you get bombarded with many styles, and then you kind of come out picking a little bit from each one, and you end up with this Southwest sound, or whatever you want to call it. But so many people have come out of that area and done well, and I think it's the part of the country that we came from has something to do with it.
Bread with a lovely ballad that went to number 4 in 1971, If. A couple of moments ago, David Gates talked a bit about his classical music background. Well, that part of his training took him off into kind of an unlikely area, and I'll tell you more about that later on in the hour. This is Dick Clark, and you're listening to the best music one more time. Dick Clark back with more of our special artist profile of Bread. Now, earlier in the hour, we heard David Gates talk a little bit about how he used to listen to a lot of classical music when he was growing up. Now, ordinarily, if somebody starts out with an interest in the classics, they have a tendency to stick in that area, but David was different. It's not that he turned his back on the classics. As a matter of fact, ironically enough, that background led him right into rock and roll.
I used to listen to Beethoven symphonies and stuff, and my dad would have all the scores. And I could read the scores, and I learned to read and write music when I was a kid. And when I got to L.A., I liked rock and roll, but not very many people in it could read it or write it. So I found work doing lead sheets and arrangements for rock people that needed to have things written out. You can't go into a 25-piece recording session and not have some music. And yet, if it's rock and roll, who are you going to get to write it out? And the old school people that are more into the old style of music didn't understand rock, and they couldn't write it out. And the new style people didn't know how to read and write music.
Now, while David was working as an arranger, he met musicians James Griffin and Robb Royer, and together they began performing as a group called Pleasure Fair. Now, in 1969, they added Jim Gordon, changed their name to Bread, and by 1970, they had this #1 million-selling smash, Make It With You. That is a beautiful record, and it went all the way to #1, sold over 1 million copies in 1970 for Bread, Make It With You. Now, that song pretty well exemplifies the type of music Bread was famous for, and we'll delve a little deeper into why they went in for that soft side of things in the next hour of Rock Rollin'. Remember?
Dick Clark's Rock Rollin', remember.
Dick Clark here with more of our special artist profile of Bread. You know, it's a given that any group is only as good as the musicians who make it up, and that rule was put to the test in 1971. Right after this song, as a matter of fact, is when that test was made.